This theater began in the early 1900s as the Cook Theater. And it opened up, it was a small theater, no live movies at that point, basically vaudeville and different types of live entertainment and talent. And it operated as the Cook Theater until about 1913. In 1913, it became the Del Mar Theater. It was a much smaller facility than what you see now. A fellow out of Rochester by the name of Del Mar, but we can't find out much about this gentleman, operated in the theater under that name. But it was during all this time that a tremendous amount of local history began in about the village, particularly as occurred in this building. In 1914, there was probably the most famous double homicide that may have happened in all of New York State and perhaps in our country, right over here in Shelby. What had happened was a local farmer by the name of George Phelps had taken on a new worker. His name was Charles Stylo. And it was only a day or two after he started working for Mr. Phelps that they found Mr. Phelps dead in his home, together with his live-in maid. And an investigation ensued. And as a result of that, what eventually happened was this Charlie Stylo was arrested for the murder of George Phelps, together with another individual. And that case went to trial in Albion. They had to bring in a judge from Niagara County back then. The DA's name was Knickerbocker, and a very local famous name here, David White, was the defense attorney. And what occurred was this Charles Stylo was convicted for the murder of Mr. Phelps and his maid, and was sentenced to death. So he was sent to Sing Sing, awaiting his death sentence. While he was awaiting his death sentence, a number of different appeals were had on his behalf, and he actually was sentenced to death 4 times to electric chair, each time just escaping one time by just 10 minutes before he was to be executed at Sing Sing. And what had happened was there was a woman attorney in New York City. Her name was Grace Humiston, and she took up Charlie's cause. In fact, kind of started this whole Innocence Project that we've heard about. Charles Stylo was one of those first cases. And she came to Medina, and in this very theater, came up on the stage and held a rally in this village to try to build some support for Charlie Stylo, convinced that he had not committed this murder. And in fact, Governor Whitman back then commissioned attorneys from Syracuse who did an investigation with respect to this whole matter, and it was found through the ballistics and some testimony that occurred during the trial that was falsely given with respect to the ballistics, and further testing that was done after the trial, that in fact the gun that they said that Charlie Stylo had murdered Mr. Phelps with was in fact not the murder weapon, and his conviction was eventually overturned. And a fellow by the name of Irwin King out of Buffalo, who was staying at the Noseville Hotel, was found to have been responsible for this homicide. This case, there's a book written about it. It's called Slaughter on Snowy Morn. You can pick it up in the local bookstores, but it's a fascinating story. It tells a lot of local history, a lot of names that you would know. But the point is that over the years, this theater was used for a lot of different things community related. As you can imagine, back then there weren't televisions, there were hardly radios had begun, and people would come into this facility to watch news clips of World War I and then, of course, World War II. It was kind of the centerpiece for entertainment in the surrounding community. In 1923, a fellow by the name of Sidney Allen purchased this theater. He operated for a number of years until 1927 when Nikita Stipson, you probably have all heard of the Dipson chain of theaters, purchased this theater. This was one of the first theaters he had purchased. He was an attorney out of Greece, who moved first to Philadelphia, and then moved up to Batavia and began buying theaters. He was so proud of this particular theater that he named it after his daughter, Diana, who was a world-famous violinist. Went to the Oberlin Conservatory and had a reputation internationally with respect to her ability to play the violin. In the early 1930s, Dipson leased his entire chain of theaters to the Warner Brothers, this being one of them. And when Warner Brothers took over this theater, in 1935 began to change the entire structure. They raised the roof, increased the size of the stage, built the balcony, and basically built it as it is today. And they operated this theater until about 1945. What had occurred in 1945 was that there was an antitrust lawsuit brought against Warner Brothers. And of course, Warner Brothers was one of the largest producers of movies in the country, but also owned in upstate New York, I think somewhere in the area of 200 theaters, and a number across the country. And so they were kind of controlling the industry, and this antitrust lawsuit was brought. And the Supreme Court of the United States, at that point in 1945, decided that Warner Brothers had to divest themselves of either making movies or running movie houses. And of course, they chose to continue making movies. So this theater, together with a number of other theaters, changed hands and went back to to Dipson. And Mr. Dipson, together with his corporation, continued to operate this theater until 1975. In 1975, that's when my family became involved in the ownership of it. The last major movie that was in this theater was Jaws. And just to give you an idea as to why all these small town theaters had died off, my recollection was that it cost us $8,500 to get Jaws here for the first 10 days. And during the first 10 days, they got 90% of the gate on top of that, and I think it was 85% of the gate each day you ran it after that. And as you can see, basically these small town theaters were running for what concessions they could sell in the way of soda pop or candy bars and that kind of thing. So quickly, these theaters died off. This building's had mothballs for many years. It opened a couple different times under some businesses that came in. But about 2 years ago now, we started to work on it. The idea being to try to bring it back to the community. There was a whole generation of young people that had never even been in this building, and with all the history that's happened in here over the years, we thought it was time to do that. So now, our vision with respect to this building is to operate it as an event center for different types of live and recorded performing arts, and over the past year we've had just a variety of different things, comedy, bands, we had a murder mystery dinner here, and of course these type of events where we have corporate meetings and those kind of things. So again, I thank you for all of you being here today. I'm going to have Gary Cooper, who's been involved in this project with me. He's going to tell you a little bit more about various aspects of this theater that I don't know about. Gary is responsible for all the audio and video that you see in this building. Gary?
Well, good afternoon and Merry Christmas. Glad you could make it here today. Medina. Oh yes, Medina. Medina basically was founded as the result of the canal going through here in about 1826. And if you can believe it or not, Medina turned out to be the Las Vegas of Western New York. Why? Well, we sit halfway between Rochester and Buffalo on the canal. It was considered to be a day's packet ride from Rochester to Medina, and then another day's packet ride back from Medina to Buffalo, or vice versa. So consequently, I was told that at one time there was approximately 100 bars in Medina. Good old Irish people, you know, they pretty much developed the canal for us and dug it and all that. 100 bars. But also what sprang up here was the only form of entertainment that a small town could have. There was no television, as you obviously know, no radio, but there was the Opera House. And Medina had no less than 3 or 4 opera houses, and I think at this very moment there are 2 that still exist. I'm told that there's an opera house above the old Avani's slash Jay's pharmacy, and they're rehabbing the Bent's Opera House on the other corner, the northwest corner of the street there. An interesting thing about the Bent's Opera House was about a year ago they had a Civil War reenactment weekend here, and it was my privilege to go up there with my wife and my cousin and some other friends. And as we were going up the steps, I heard the melody from the Burns movie, the PBS special on the Civil War. And I thought that somebody was playing a nice stereo up in the Bent's Opera House, and I got up there and here's a violinist on the stage. And the sound was just phenomenal. And it was phenomenal because that's exactly what the Opera House was invented for, was to project acoustic sound. So here's this violinist up on the stage there, and it was just ringing around there like I'd never heard before. And I thought, wow, that's what this was all about. So when you hear the term opera house, we think about Italian singers in tight shorts and stuff like that, but that's not really what happened in the opera houses. Everything happened in the opera houses. They were the place for entertainment, from comedy acts to bands, dances, you name it, they did it in the opera house. I was told that, I don't know for a fact, but I know for it was a fact that Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show performed in the opera house in Albion. I'm sure he probably did in Medina too, but I don't know that. And as well as there was a famous performer, she was a female, and she actually performed with John Wilkes Booth before he killed Lincoln. She had performed up there. But what happened was this idea of having multiple forms of entertainment in an opera house got down to where some gentleman who was somewhat of an entrepreneur was reading a magazine one time, and he found out that he could buy a movie projector. So he bought the movie projector, and then he convinced the local opera house owner to do a night of movies in his opera house. And so inadvertently, opera houses became movie theaters. Just wonderful. They were perfect for that. However, 1929 was the very first talkie movie. It was called The Jazz Singer, and it starred Al Jolson. And it was the start of a whole new thing. And what the sound engineers out in Weston were making the movies discovered was these opera houses that were good for someone singing in a natural environment like the Bent's Opera House and that violinist was not conducive to sound. That natural amplification was good for a person standing up on stage speaking, all that. It just made the sound bounce around coming out of speakers. So they knew they had a problem. And Warner Brothers set out to solve that problem so that everybody would hear exactly the same sound as what the sound engineers were hearing in the sound theaters in Hollywood, the sound stages. And this theater was one of 3 that was picked to try this new technology out in 1936. This whole concept set the whole future of sound in movie theaters. Every theater that has come since utilizes this technology. And what does the technology consist of? It's a combination of a lot of soft surfaces and a certain amount of hard surfaces so that the room does not ring around, does not suck up the sound too much. It's just like perfect, just like the sound in a theater. And that was accomplished by, if you look at the walls here, that's acoustic cloth that lets the sound go through. And then behind that, there's 6 inches of mineral wool held back by chicken wire. And there's a space in between there. So as the sound comes out of the speakers in here, that grabs the sound. And then the lower part of the room is more hard surfaces to get the sound a little bit to your ears. So it doesn't sound like you walk in, you got earplugs in your ears, or you got, you know, some kind of a sinus headache. Now, to add to that, Joe and myself installed the sound system, and we're utilizing equal sound distribution by getting the speakers up in the air so the distance from the speakers to everybody's ears even, so we don't create any hot spots in the room. Just about where everybody's sitting, we'll hear the same level of sound in here. And that's the secret of the acoustics here in this theater. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.